Christian Berger, president of Berger Consulting Group. I'm delighted to be here today with my good friend Jeff Sample, also an industry advocate. Jeff and I have known each other many years and worked together on the AGC and other industry forums. We're fortunate. We have been an existing firm for 25 years and helping contractors with systems, technology, business process. This video is really an opportunity for us to talk a little bit about not only Berger Consulting, but more importantly, where the industry is with tech adoption and what opportunities exist, some of the challenges. And there really isn't anybody better for helping me with that dialogue than Jeff Sample.
Well, I'm excited, Christian. Thanks for having me here. And it's an opportunity for us to talk about, where you've been over the last 25 years, where you're going in the next 25, and where the industry plays in along that. But if we're going to do a good job of that, we're going to have to start at where did Berger Consulting Group start? What was its foundation and kind of what was the origin around starting the organization as a whole?
We've had our firm for 25 years, based in Chicago, helping construction contractors exclusively with IT and construction, IT-related matters.
Well, tell us a little bit about your history and kind of what you want to commemorate today.
Well, I appreciate that, Jeff. It's been an amazing year. I mean, when I started in construction, I would tell you that I don't think I was putting network cards in PCs, but it hadn't been that long before. So our industry has, in some ways, transformed amazingly. We've gone from fax machines and paper forms to spreadsheets and email. So we've still got a little ways to go. But over the course of the 25 years, I've had an opportunity to work with amazing construction firms doing building work, road, civil, industrial work, specialty contractors. So quite a variety of construction companies and people. Really fallen in love with the industry. I actually joke oftentimes that once you come in the industry, you actually can't get out. And like you, I'm sure it would be hard to think about going anywhere else.
You're right. I've 25 years in technology, 10 years in construction, and I don't see myself going anywhere else. And that's the beauty. So take a step back. You're not putting network cards in computers, but you're darn close to it. What prompted starting Berger Consulting? Like, how did that happen?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I was working for a large company, software tech company, who will remain nameless. Nothing wrong with them, but they hired me in a managerial position. And that's not my cup of tea. I'm glad I did it, but after a year of being at this company, I had moved to Chicago. I was asked by a client, an old client called me up and said, "Hey, we need some help. Can you help us out?" And I said, "Absolutely." And so I got back. I called up, I resigned my position. I went on to help that firm. One thing led to another. Now, in all fairness, I had already worked at FMI, the consulting firm, for about 8 years. So I knew the industry, had a good network in place, and so that allowed me to make the jump. But one client and took me off on this journey. And I can't, looking back, I have to say, do I have a few regrets along the way? Absolutely. But making that move, not a bit.
And so you don't regret the move into construction. Probably a few bumps and bruises along the way you can't get rid of. I wonder if you could go back, other than telling yourself don't do it, what would you do, and what would you tell yourself maybe back then what to do, and give yourself that little bit of advice?
Well, I think probably scaling for growth. Like I didn't grow at the speed at which I probably should have. But I wanted to maintain in Berger Consulting work-life balance for the people that work there. I just didn't want to become another big, let's just say big four type of firm where everybody's working 6 days a week and 80-hour day or weeks and such. So work-life balance was important, not only for me, but for the team. And so maybe I kept it scaled for that reason. But now I'm finding more competition. When I started, we had no competition. We were the only game in town, and that was beneficial. But today there's more competition. The other thing I probably would have done, like some of our brethren in the industry, is maybe start a software company, because there's plenty of tech opportunity out there. And with what our team knows about tech and software, that could have been an avenue I would have taken. But otherwise, I mean, the ride's been great and helped amazing people along the way.
Yeah, you probably met a few of those amazing folks. That's kind of where I want to take you back. So go back to early on. What were some of the problems you were tackling? That first client calls you up and you're probably seeing some similarities amongst those and others. What were some of those early problems?
The thing that I would say is most um, common is contractors seem to want to they want vision and direction, absolutely, but they're light on the accountability and the enforcement to actually implement and deploy. So we'll make great progress in software selection, software strategy, tech, but then when it comes to actually changing processes in an organization or making people do something different, they lose the willpower. So I would say that I underestimated that challenge when we started out. I would say, and then to some extent, one of the things that's changed quite a bit is the vendor's service offering. Back in the day, and you would know this, back in the day, the software companies were privately held and very committed to the construction companies, and they had a full suite of services to help implement. Today's software companies seem to be more about producing and selling the software, less on the implementation side. And so it throws the services and deployment responsibility to firms like ours and others to help deploy. So I think that's challenging as well.
Yeah, I think if you take it back to those early days with those large, I won't call them ERP because I have my own definition of what that is, and I don't really necessarily believe we have a single ERP solution for construction. We have ERP stacks, maybe. But if you take it back to then, it was because most of those products, not because there was something wrong with the products, but because of where technology was this is 25 years ago when you started this. So client server was the way, right? Those services groups had to come with it. Eventually those things split apart. You got to watch through that.
Yeah.
You hit on a couple of things. I think first is that change management in construction has been difficult. I think it's difficult in any industry. But how has change management, been a part of that journey for at least some of your early clients? And where have you seen the ones that have taken advantage of it really, shine?
Well, it's funny you say that. So I would tell you that IT governance isn't, I'm sorry to say, kind of a new idea in our space. And IT governance is really about more than just the tech. It's about how does the organization overall deal with technology? So adoption, innovation. I mean, here's an example. It was only 5 years ago that I started to see business analysts in construction firms. Prior to that, we didn't even have them. Everything funneled through IT, and they were overworked and understaffed, right? So you couldn't get things done. So that was a challenge. Now we also have, and I'm sure you've seen this as well, director of innovation. Now more construction firms have director of innovation. For people like me, that's a very positive sign because that means that they're serious about innovation. They're trying to do new things, but we still have the same problem of in some ways, I wouldn't say it's a lack of innovation. It's a lack of expertise and resources to actually implement solutions. And I wonder, I mean, what's going to drive, back to you, what's going to drive us to get more tech resources in the industry? I mean, construction firms can't continue to operate with a network engineer and an overworked IT director.
I think it's culture. I mean, I think if you really look at exactly what you're talking about, especially because I have experience from outside of the industry and we've watched other industries go through this maturation period. Early on, technology is associated with IT. Why? Because the early stuff is IT specific, right? We've got to get wireless going. Once we got wireless going, we got mobile devices. Like, wow, your IT, your innovation, they're not the same thing. And as the industry matures, we start to see these things break out. It's really funny. I'll never forget coming from outside of the industry with business analysts that did and helped us with change management, and then getting here and seeing that everything fell in IT.
Yep.
Right. And I think that culturally and from an industry perspective, it's nice to have so much coming at us because it overwhelmed us. And when you're overwhelmed, some people drown, but the others lean to people like Berger to figure it out. And all of a sudden, when they figure it out, they start to mature, bring in business analysts. We're starting to see data scientists
Yeah.
and data
Yep.
focus. But I'm interested in your take on this because I have my own opinion that I believe when we get to the point of construction truly seeing technology and innovation, right? Not just innovation or just technology, right? They're not separate of one another. They're also not the same. When they start to see it as a true strategic advantage, when that's when I think that the culture will change, that we'll start to see people pushed in, not pushed, but allowed those staffs, allowed the resources.
So, very interesting point. I would tell you that when I started in construction, we had, the equivalent of my generation back then, running thing, or actually it was a generation older than me back then. And what that turned into was sort of that's technology. If it has a plug, it belongs in the IT department mentality. And there just wasn't a lot of belief in what technology and innovation could provide. It was almost a what you'd call necessary evil, and a lot of people viewed it that way, and because these were the old guard in construction, and they didn't need the technology; they had their intuition, and they could they could drive by a construction project and know whether it was doing well or not. And that kind of individual is rare now, and I think the technology is going to provide us much better narrative about risk, inefficiency, issues within individual firms. Today, we have, and speaking of culture, today we have construction, a new generation coming up, the young management that came from out of school with learning on technology. And so they're comfortable. In fact, they demand that, and they're not going to go to work for firms that aren't current on their tech stack. So I think that when I get brought in, a lot of times management is saying we need this for competitive advantage, not just because our customers are asking, but because our employees are asking. So I think that that's a positive sign. A newer generation moving in that's more tech savvy, tech friendly, and pressure from the outside is having a big effect. So I think that culture that you describe is absolutely changing.
Yeah, and it helps grow the industry forward as we go through the cultural shift. I'm wondering where you're seeing the stumbling blocks. Where are people falling over consistently?
Well, I would say that, and I'll take responsibility as well. I think that sometimes clients want answers around tech, like what solution should we buy, what strategy should we have, with the idea that maybe that's going to get the job done. When in fact, the solution's only 25% of the problem. Actual implementation, execution is the rest. I use the example a lot of times about buying an piece of exercise equipment for the home. And I mean, you can buy it and put it in the living room, but if it's a coat rack, you're not going to get any benefit. And I feel like that's what we're short on sometimes is execution and the accountability to make stuff happen.
Yeah, I would fully agree that I've gone into a lot of construction companies with a lot of exercise equipment that's hanging on to laundry and other things, or that they use as a flag to put out there that we
Yep.
have this
Yep.
or we have that, and implementation. You go all the way back to where we started this conversation that 25 years ago. You bought the software from those companies, but mainly you bought a lot of the services, right?
Absolutely.
And so those don't exist right now, and that's on us now. It's on a different group of people. So talk a little bit about strategies for implementation and how those companies need to, address it, but also how Berger has really stood out in that process? Because I think that's one of the things that you've got the big four and and others that go for the flashy moves, but you've found blocking and tackling inside of construction. So talk a little bit about that implementation process and that rigor.
Yep. So, among other things, when we do deployments, we're insistent upon an executive sponsor, somebody in an organization, typically president, VP, chief something, who says, this is important. We need this done. I'm responsible. Tell me what you need to get it done. Executive sponsorship is key. We don't even really touch a project without that. An implementation team, a group of people that are going to help deploy whatever it is, help gain commitment to the solution, process, controls, getting rid of spreadsheets. All of that's very important. And I'll tell you, it's kind of interesting, and I'm sure you've seen this as well, but our user community inside of a construction firm is not made up of one type of individual. It's a bell curve. And you've got a whole bunch of people in the middle who are willing to go along, but they're not going to lead the charge. You got a few people at the front who are like all excited, ready to go, almost have to rein them in. And then you've got some technophobes at the back. And the technophobes, as you know, don't want any of this change. They're close to Luddites, but the problem is if management listens to the vocal minority, they're going to take a different path.
Mm-hmm.
And so I like to listen politely, but then move with the front running group and bring the bell curve, if you will, forward. And that's the way we approach implementations and get buy-in, is through a team, I would say. Another factor to take into account is, I would say, we talk about de-risking projects. So on a large scale deployment, where is the risk? Contractors are great at de-risking their construction projects, right? They know that all day long.
Mm-hmm.
But de-risking technology projects, not so much. Where's it coming from? Is it the vendor? Is it integration? Is it training and adoption? Let's de-risk these things before we get started. So I think those are among the things that we look at when we deploy.
Well, you broke it down pretty nicely, because I think in the construction industry, especially, if you can put it into their terms, then you have an opportunity. Plus, you hit on a couple of leadership traits there in that bell curve, right? The Luddites need to be listened to, because everybody in the process needs to be heard, right? They don't all need to be followed.
Exactly. Good way to put it.
But they need to be heard, because if you're heard, the other thing we've seen is in, general technology in general across the industry. I was just thinking about this. I was in Texas last week, and we pulled up in our car to a parking spot outside of a barbecue joint we were going to. And it had a QR code right there, and it said you must pay for parking right away. No, and it had a QR code. And I was like, you're assuming I have a cell phone, you're assuming I can use a QR code, and you're assuming, and I thought, wow, that's interesting, because to your point, the Luddites came along with it. Because you just can't park now.
That's right.
Right. You just can't do certain things, and they will come along, right? They it's not that they will, well, some of them will fall off, right? But they're probably going to fall off anyway and retire. There's nothing wrong with that. But it speaks to the natural progression and having people be heard in an organization, but also moving that organization forward. And if you moved it at the pace of the people in the front, you'd leave the middle behind and the late middle behind, right?
Yep.
And if you pulled it at the pace of the Luddite that doesn't move, these people are going to leave.
Absolutely. I'm glad you brought that up, because there's another element to this that I see, and I frequently use it in speaking and talking to management, is the way a bank operates. When you go to the ATM, do you have any choices? Do you have choices in the way you do your transaction? No, it's rigid. Right? When you go to a bank teller, can you say, hey, I'd like you to do my check process this way or that way? No. Even a branch manager only has limited, right? Mm-hmm. The rules are set, mm-hmm. and we don't operate that way. I've worked in quite a bit recently with very large decentralized construction firms. Large and decentralized. Every one of those business units is allowed to make decisions about how they operate, what systems they use, how they process change orders or billings or what have you. not corporate. And so, how do you adopt standards and deploy technology in some kind of a consistent way when you have that level of decentralization? So, I feel like in some ways, the nature of our industry, which is very entrepreneurial. I mean, project managers at a job site have enormous amount of flexibility and power. So I think that in some ways the adoption can be slowed by that kind of behavior, where in fact it would have been better to say, let's get consensus and then let's move and push it down. That hasn't been happening.
No, and in fact, what you see in those decentralized organizations is hotspots.
Yeah.
Hotspots where this stuff is working and it's clicking and it's pumping and it's pushing. But ultimately, it goes to that discussion of data then, right? Because you have those hotspots, but then if you don't have a foundation across that decentralization, then you can't build consistently across it. I wonder, how have you articulated that, especially because the decentralization, right, and the empowerment at the field level, especially of, project management and superintendents and foremen, it's powerfully important because they're the ones who de-risk projects.
Yep.
Right? You're not gonna, you can give them a bunch of cool technology superpowers to help them see things, but if you give those to me, I'm not gonna see it. I'm just gonna see cool things.
Yeah, right.
They're
That's a
gonna
good
see
point.
problems.
Yep.
So we want to maintain the entrepreneurial spirit, but there's a need at the level to kind of draw some of those bank teller ATM analogies together.
The person who's going to be most frustrated by that scenario is going to be a senior PM or a VP of ops. Okay, if you're a VP of ops in a very large construction company and you're wondering how my job is doing out in the middle of Cheyenne, Wyoming, are you going to go digging around in a network drive looking at a spreadsheet?
No.
Exactly. So we can't let project managers not use some of the standardized systems. If there's a tweak that's needed for a customer because of billing, fine. But core systems like RFI, submittals, meeting minutes, all of these things generate a data trail that then becomes visibility for a senior level manager to say, call me up one day and say, hey, you've got 25 RFIs that haven't been answered in 3 weeks. What's going on out there? Or you've got a 30 change requests going on. What's going on with the owner or the engineer? So it's that visibility. And because we've been operating in spreadsheet land for so long, I think we've almost become accustomed to not being able to see dashboard view of project health.
Well, and we've become, it's weird. We've become used to trusting those people in the field, but not realizing that lack of visibility, we trust them and that trust doesn't change, but we can't support them.
Right. Well,
Right. They
absolutely.
need support
Yep.
because they have a purview that maybe we have a better look at certain things. So personally, I think in this process, something I've learned is that you've got to kind of flip it on those project managers, superintendents that are out there and say, listen, if what you need to realize is that if we have this foundational data and we have this foundational flow of information, we can actually allow you to be more entrepreneurial, to take more risks.
Absolutely.
How do you get that how do you flip that to make them realize that more standards creates more flexibility?
Well, I don't quite approach it that way, but I think I like the way you phrase that. I would say that my response typically would be, look, each job site doesn't get to decide about payroll, how we're going to process payroll. You're not, the guys in the field don't add any value to that question, and we would be absolutely inefficient and out of compliance if we did. So no, payroll's not an option. Well, in my mind, job cost is the same thing, right? We can't have everybody running rogue with different cost codes and different ways to forecast, different ways to monitor change orders. What happens is you've got all of these jobs running that way, and the financial department's trying to put together a reliable financial statement, and they're getting surprises left and right because change orders are coming in, invoices are late. This is going to surprise you, Jeff. but there are contractors at the job site who will put invoices from subs in a drawer until it's convenient because they don't want to hurt their job costs, or foremen who will code their time to buckets of labor cost that have budget available, not what they were doing. I know, shocking.
Shocking that I would know my balance well enough to know where I should put my.
Yeah.
Are you saying there's people who walk the job site and go, "Ah, well, we're 30% of the way through. We're 30% complete."
Yeah. Yes. Yes. Exactly right. I like the technology that's becoming available. All the progress measurement that we see now. You probably know some of those solutions better than I do, but all of the augmented reality and measurement solutions that can capture progress are going to be a boon. The drones that can measure large civil sites and capture and measure, that's good stuff. So I think we're going to be closer and from a progressing standpoint in terms of knowing where our jobs are. But I'm still concerned about some of the basic job cost, change order, billing, contract management aspect of things.
So you're going to probably fall out of your chair when you say this, but 10 years of doing this now, and we've known each other since the beginning of my tenure in this industry, is that I'm coming more and more back to AR, MR, all of those things you talked about. They're building fantastic buildings on top of balsa wood foundations. If we don't go back to accounting,
Well,
job costing, estimating, these are foundational pieces that without those building blocks, everything else we're building is a false utopia.
yeah, I like the way you put that. I actually have a little bit of a diagram I use from time to time in programs. It's pyramid. Think of Maslow's hierarchy.
Maslow's hierarchy of
Okay,
needs.
so at the bottom is my foundational technology, and I have to have ERP, time card, billing system, probably at this point, project management system. Look, do not step past go without having that in place. Then you move to the next layer up, which is value add for sure, and good, stable, reliable, technology that's been around that could help HR, CRM, equipment management. I mean, those are examples of things that maybe not in the category of fundamental, but might as well go for it. Then you move up one more level, and now you've got into innovation, where you're actually getting some even greater competitive advantage. Not all of it's tested, but there's opportunity for the competitive advantage in there. And then you get into that final layer in my model, where you've got a you could call it R&D, but definitely speculative, where you might be building some stuff for yourself. You might be taking a flyer on a startup or something like that in the hopes that you'll get some competitive advantage. So all the shiny object media, all the media is focused on the shiny object stuff and all the advanced cool technology. And unfortunately, that captivates everybody's attention. We need this stuff. But my phone still rings with people that need help with time card, invoice routing. Basics.
The basics, the blocking and tackling. And it's funny for anybody tuning in that doesn't know the relationship here. I came into the industry 10 years ago and was blazing at, virtual reality and all of the, building information modeling and virtual design and construction.
I remember those days.
And Christian was arguing with me that we should be putting ERP up front and we should be talking about accounting. And I was like, that's just no fun. Like, we need to go after these things. And 10 years later, I've actually come back to you a bit. Because I think we were building something. We weren't realizing we missed that foundation.
Well, I don't want to be too critical. I would have to say that the industry needs that less than sexy technology and the blocking and tackling, if you will. But I don't feel like you're getting competitive advantage by implementing ERP. I would say you're not getting competitive advantage by implementing project management or time cards because everybody else is already there. So you're just getting to table stakes at that point. And it's you have to do that, but then to get to the things that do add competitive advantage, it would be HR solutions, it would be data and analytics strategy, it would be some integration technology to eliminate all the duplicate and triplicate entry that's going on today.
And there's still tons of that. And we have a labor shortage and we have issue shortage, right? So you're hitting on a couple of things and that I want to kind of pull back, table stakes. Right? This is just the reality of where you need to be as an organization. I had a chance to, and have had a chance to sit down with a lot of leaders, a lot of IT folks who only a few said 10 years ago, we've got to upgrade our accounting systems. We've got to upgrade in order to facilitate that future. You're adding in now that you not only need that piece, and we could argue the ERP versus accounting, but accounting, in our business has, it has the payroll, it has, AR, accounts payable. It's got those basic functions, right? That might be a little different than an ERP in other industries, but you've got to have that.
Yep.
And now so you're saying we've got to split that down and say, now I need my project management there as well.
Well, it kind of depends. I would say that there's a very interesting bifurcation that I'm seeing, and you may as well, between the accounting systems that have project management built in and those that integrate with outside project management systems like Procore and others, right? And so it depends on whether or not there are some contractors that sort of come from the school of thought of, I want my project managers in one system and one system only. And so they're basically saying, we're going to be on this project management system for cost management, for commitments, for change orders, and RFI submittals, meeting minutes, et cetera. And then accounting can do whatever they want over here. And it's going to feed, but that's dependent on a pretty good level of integration that's a little tenuous right now. I would say the other school of thought is, no, I want everybody in one solution, and that's going to mean having my payroll, my general ledger, AP, all of those things, job costs, in the same system where I'm doing RFIs, submittals, meeting minutes, et cetera. And I think that's an interesting model. There are still some firms that are doing that, and I think there's more to shake out on that. I will tell you the big difference from when I started is that today's ERP systems are definitely understanding the need and importance for integration. So the point solutions are coming out of the woodwork. I've got HR, equipment, inventory tool, subcontract management, payment systems. So I've got all of these third-party apps, if you will, outside. Well, they have impact on the financial system. So these ERP systems today have got to have good integration technology available.
And it facilitates a couple things, right? You have that now, and it needs to fuel and connect. And quite frankly, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, that wasn't possible.
Nope, that's right.
And now we have that capability, and you can use some of those other things to backfill that group. You need pay apps. It's a great opportunity to stand out in your competition. How can a general contractor stand out with a pay app? Like, what does a pay app even do for you?
Well, it's trying to control the payment to the subcontractor supplier community. One of the things that I've always kind of liked about Textura was an early play, and then GC Pay came along not too long after that. And their idea was, we're going to manage the governance of the payables process, and you as a sub won't be paid by me as a general if I don't have your signed contract, lien waiver, bond, insurance certificate, et cetera. Well, so that paperwork was complicated for you as a trade contractor, and you got it wrong. I got frustrated. You got delayed.
Yep. I didn't get paid.
Exactly.
I'm financing your job.
So
like this whole conversation we've had before.
So Textura said, enough of that noise. One cloud application where my contract with you and all the paperwork exists, and the lien laws are being followed according to the state we're in. So now, as you process your draw request, I'm seeing it. I'm seeing your requirements, your submittal requirements, and if you don't, you're getting notified. So when you're not getting paid, you go there and ask, why haven't I been paid? Oh, I don't have a bond in. So I think the pay application side of it is that. And then the final leg in that whole thing, the actual payment, I think some of the pay applications that are coming out now are really probably mainly around definitely expediency, but fraud protection, a lot of that. I mean, I've been, and this is, you'll laugh a little bit, but I've been in a few companies where they actually have, you won't even know what this is, a postage machine where they take a large bank of checks that have been stuffed in envelopes and run them through a postage machine.
You're right.
Am I dating myself?
you are a little bit there, but no,
So-
I've seen that.
So the electronic payment process is meant to streamline, but also just get rid of the check process so we're not susceptible to fraud.
Well, and susceptible to fraud's a big one, right? It caused a lot of us to backtrack. So the interesting part about coming in here, when we met, was fraud was on the rise. In fact, it was pushing people away from innovation. And so I'm wondering how that's impacted the process from your perspective.
Well, the prevalence of fraud, I would say, has been something we've seen, probably has, I mean, we've really gone from I mean, back then it was a big deal, but check fraud, right? That was a big thing back then. Companies went from pre-printed checks to blank stock. They called it blank stock, so that your barcode wasn't on there because people would actually go dumpster diving to get cancel checks and things to be able to commit fraud. Well, today our risk is not so much. I mean, it's definitely still there, but I would say the cybersecurity aspect, getting hacked, getting your data taken, and construction firms, as you know, I would say they've definitely increased their vigilance, but I'm not sure it's where it needs to be. And one thing that contractors have done, at least in the last 3 to 5 years, is increase their level of insurance on their cyber insurance. And but sometimes they don't read the requirements of that policy, and they think they've got coverage, but they're not following the governance rules that say, in order for us to cover you, you have to do these things, multi-factor and other things. So they aren't doing that. And I think that leads them to a false sense of security. So I guess back to your question, I would say that the vigilance is around cyber threat and fraud needs to be pretty high on the CFOs and CIOs landscape.
Well, and for me, what I heard was fraud's been going on forever. It's just changing from diving into a dumpster to diving into an email, and eventually
Yeah.
it'll be diving into an application,
Yeah.
like we're seeing and have seen. So vigilance, but also not just holding back there, right? Moving forward, implementing new technologies that actually have benefits in the strength that they can do. So in the pay application situation, we can establish the connection between our banks so that somebody can't just drop in a new number
Yep.
and cause us to put $10,000, $20,000 into the wrong account.
Yep.
Right. So we can get faster and get more secure at the same time and have a better outcome.
Yeah, I think that's the control aspect of things is where the overuse of spreadsheets and emails can concern me because, and this is a boring term that nobody likes to talk about, but audit trail, like being able to see how this check request or this invoice made its way along, who approved it, why was it approved or why was it declined? Are all the admin compliance items checked off? I mean, right now in a lot of firms, those things are being handled by different people in different spreadsheets. And so if I ever want to go back and see what was the trail on this thing, it's hard. And here's another little element that I would say I've noticed in my history here is we used to work for firms that were doing 50 million, 100 million. A big contractor was 200 million. That was back then. Today we're working with firms that are 500 million to 2-3 billion. What I would tell you is some of these guys got big and didn't really know it. And so they didn't change their business processes. So these are $2 billion a year firms operating like 120 million.
Yep.
So
But,
I think,
Christian, I want to keep the family experience. I want to keep that. Wait,
well, there is some of that, I would say, but in some ways, I'm not sure. And I saw this question come at me this morning from somebody else, but the question was, when we go from 500 million to a billion, what's going to change? Like that question doesn't get asked. At least what's going to change from an IT tech stack standpoint, whether it be a more sophisticated HR platform, a larger scale ERP platform, more enterprise applications. I mean, there is a lot that needs to come along, and better IT management, deployment, governance. I mean, those things you need a bigger IT department with different positions than you used to have. So as firms have grown, I'm not sure that the engagement with technology has grown with.
I don't think the knowledge that you have to grow it with has either. I think as much as they're blindsided somewhat by moving from 300 million to $1 billion and not really having the purview to it, they don't realize the strains that new number is placing on the staffing that they have and on the people that they've put in charge. But also, we see this consistently. Oh, I want to keep my culture the same.
Yeah.
Yes, you can keep your culture the same, but you're going to have to do it at scale as well.
Yeah. And I think that is a difference. I mean, I think there was a time when we tried the construction industry and its family owned nature tried to protect certain individuals and maybe not move them on at a rate that they should have. And so consequently, we left a clerk who billed on a spreadsheet there and left him alone. And or I've got somebody right now who's doing payroll, gets the timesheets in manually, does a bunch of math on the timesheets, then keys it into a spreadsheet, then does it into their payroll system. I mean, it's craziness. And now we're getting a chance to focus on that. But like, why did that happen? Like, to me, the lesson in all of this is, why did that happen? There are so many lessons in adoption of technology that you can just looking back, how did we get here? And then how do we move forward?
Well, it's an interesting one. I was just at an event last week, and one of the teachings from an exercise that we did was around the speed of getting from A to B. And the interesting part was we broke A to B up into 6 steps. And after each step, we paused and reflected.
Nice.
And it didn't dawn on me until doing that exercise that we don't in the industry pause to reflect.
Yeah.
And I think at each stage of growth, if we were to pause and reflect and look back, I think we'd understand how adding a few things could get us to the end faster.
Yep.
Like just taking a breath around everything. And we just don't do that
No,
enough.
it's definitely not in the culture. And there are some good learning elements that can come from that for sure.